Alright guys, I'm going to go through 5 quick things to think about as we deal with negative emotions today. So the first thing I want you guys to think about is when you have a series of negative emotions rise up or something happens in your life and you have this negative emotion, it might be anger, it might be sadness, fear, hurt or guilt. I'm going to talk to you about how you can deal with this and 5 things to think about as you deal with them. The first one is if you have this come up in your life, I want you to ask yourself this question. Is this emotion that's coming up, although it's negative, is it fair? Am I being fair to myself? Is it fair to feel this? And the reason you ask that is sometimes some people go into a state of negative emotion and they victimize themselves and they put themselves down and they feel very low. But actually it's okay. Like, we have to be sometimes kind to ourselves instead of putting ourselves in a position of low states, low energy and not feeling the right way, because life happens. Like if you've lost someone close to you, someone passes away, you are going to feel sadness. And so in that state, when you look at it and you say, is this fair? Of course it's fair, because life happens. It's about how we deal with it and move on. Now, whilst you can also be fair to yourself and ask yourself, okay, this negative emotion comes up, am I being fair to myself? You also got to look at the other side, because it's always about balance, okay? And the other question to ask is, if you have a negative emotion come up, is this negative emotion justified? So this is where you're now tough on yourself. So you can be fair to yourself, but you also got to be tough on yourself. Now, how would that work? So think about this. You're driving, someone cuts you off on the road, blocks you, nearly hits you. You could have a couple of emotions. You could have been, a sudden bit of fear in case they nearly clipped you. Or sometimes, like me in the past, I've had this before, someone cuts me off and it's like, oh, I'm going to cut you off, I'm going to move in front of you. In my younger days before I learned how to deal with these things. So you got to think, like, okay, so someone cuts you off, do you go into a state of rage, anger, and you go, I'm going to cut them off? I'm going to drive and I'm going to block them now, or race into the lights or whatever it might be, alright? So we all have these things that can happen. But you got to ask yourself, okay, is it justified? And of course it's not. Is it justified to go back and do what they've done to you? No. So you think about those 2 things. So is it fair? Am I being fair to myself? Is this emotion justified? The next thing to think about is, okay, when a negative emotion comes up because you're in life and a series of circumstances come up and you have this negative emotion, it might be sadness, it might be anger, it might be fear, whatever it is this a response, an emotional response that I'm feeling? Or is this a pattern of behavior? Because I'll tell you what can happen. Sometimes you have a response, okay? Like I said, if someone cuts you off, you might have a sudden fear, a sudden bit of like frustration and anger, But if you have a pattern where every time that happens, you react a certain way and you chase them down and you also cut them off, and you repeat with an action, a pattern that always happens, that's not going to do you any justice. That's not going to serve you. So it's okay. You have to think about this. Is this just a passing response, an emotional response? Because we're human, we're going to have emotions that come up when things happen in life. But it comes up, they cut you off, you feel a bit of anger or frustration, and you let it pass, okay? Versus a behavior, a pattern of behavior that you're aware, which is, I need to get them back. So now, if you have a pattern of behavior, this is what you need to ask yourself. 4th thing to think about with negative emotions. Is this helpful to me? Now, why do I say that? See, on a both conscious and unconscious level, our unconscious mind, one of its main prime directives is to preserve this body, preserve your body. And when you think about it, you're never going to walk into a situation specifically to cause harm to yourself, to cause any danger or pain to yourself. But anger, for example, if you are in constant states of anger or fear or sadness, this is quite harmful. As we know, sadness can be depression. If you're constantly in a state of anger, it can cause certain physical issues with your body. So if you know this and you're conscious about this, you're not going to directly allow this to affect you. So the question to ask is this helpful? If when you feel this emotion, this sudden emotion come up, or whatever it is, anger, sadness, is it helpful to you? Okay? So if it's not helpful to you, then you got to think, what can I do so that I am allowing myself not to fall into this pattern of behavior, not to allow myself to react this way all the time, because you're going to want to look after yourself. You're not going to go out there looking to do harm to yourself. And that brings me to my last point, which is, what will my future self say to me in this situation? Now, I'll tell you how this works, right? Think about it. From the day you're born to where you are now watching this video with me, you have been through negative situations, challenges in life, pains, fears, states of anger, sadness. You've been through all of that and you're still here watching this, okay? So you get through things. And what you need to think about is sometimes when you reflect back on something that happened to you, so just have a quick think in your life, okay, between, you know, when you were born and now, what have you got through? What challenges have you got through? What states of anger have you got through? Sadness have you got fear that you've got through? Whatever you've got through, you got through them. So it's like, okay, if I got through them, when we're in a state of reflection and we look back at something, so many thoughts come to our mind and be like, I could have dealt with that differently. It wasn't as bad as I thought. Sometimes even a negative situation that happens in the past, we look at it now as positive. For example, you're in a very bad toxic relationship. And at the time when the breakup happens, you're sad, you're depressed, you're angry, could be any of those emotions. But then fast forward 5 years, you're with someone, the perfect person that you like, want, dream of, and you look back and you go, I'm so happy that that happened, that we broke up and that happened. And yes, I wasn't in the right space then, but this has happened now and this is the best thing. So it's all a matter of perspective. But upon reflection, it allows us to think that way. So what you can do, of the 5 things I've talked to you about, is the last one is think about, okay, in 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years from now, when I look back at this and I feel this emotion, what would I say to myself? What would myself in the future say to myself now about the current circumstance that I'm feeling anger about, sadness about, fear about? And you'll find you'll come up with different answers because you're removing yourself from the emotion and the present moment to look at it with a big, wide perspective from above. All right, so those are the 5 things I want you to think about when you have a sudden situation, a sudden negative emotion, or you're in a state of anger, fear, sadness, hurt, and guilt, or any minor or major negative emotion. Think of those 5 questions and it'll help you deal with life a lot easier. Hopefully that's helpful to you, and I'll see you guys at the next lesson.